Last week we had a look at some of the exciting developments with income tax returns. This week I want to have a quick refresher on VAT. In some respects this will be a quick overview, but there are a number of points that we find are difficult, and I want to highlight these so that you don't trip over any of these in the future. So to start with, when do you have to register for VAT? Well, the most common time is when your VATable turnover exceeds £83,000, and this is calculated on a rolling 12-month basis. The other important time is if you take over a VAT registered business, in which case you have to look at the turnover of the previous owner. Now, as everybody knows, VAT is a complicated tax, and before you even register for VAT, you've got to have an understanding, because your VATable turnover is the total of everything you sell, excluding anything which is exempt. So you need to know what is exempt. Now, if you do exceed the VATable turnover, but you don't expect your turnover to be above £81,000 in the next 12 months, you can apply for an exception from registration, but you do need to notify HMRC within 30 days. If you've been trading for a while by the time you do register, then you can go back and reclaim VAT from earlier periods. And for goods or equipment, this is 4 years, and for services, it's 6 months. But the purchases must relate to the current business and have a direct relationship to supplies that the current business is making. Making a claim for pre-registration VAT is very straightforward, and you just include all the VAT to be claimed on your first VAT return. But you need to make sure that you have appropriate records to support the claim, because if it results in a repayment, then it's quite likely that HMRC will ask to see the records. Now, when it comes to cancelling registration, you're obliged to deregister if you stop trading or cease making taxable supplies, although you can these days delay your deregistration to catch some last-minute invoices. If your turnover is below 81,000, you can voluntarily deregister. There are two important aspects in relation to deregistration. The first is that you have to put in a final VAT return, but the most important, and one that catches most people out, is you have to account for VAT on the market value of goods and equipment still on hand. Virtually all VAT returns these days are submitted online, but there are certain exceptions. One is on religious grounds, and the other is on the basis of disability or remoteness of location, making online submission impossible. Completing the VAT return is no less complex than the tax itself, and you'll see appearing on the screen now some of the items which go into box 1 of the VAT return. These include things like the VAT on a reverse charge, where you receive services from other EU countries, and VAT on the cost of gifts costing more than £50. Box 2 is where you account for the VAT on goods received from VAT-registered traders in other EU countries. Remember that the VAT on imported services are accounted for in box 1. It's likely that the VAT in box 2 will be reclaimed in box 4. So for most but not all businesses, this is just a paper exercise. Box 4 itself is where you reclaim your input tax on all your normal expenses, and you need to have evidence of the costs, and this is primarily a VAT invoice. Now, when it comes to things to remember not to do, don't include goods bought wholly for personal use, for business entertaining, or under a second-hand goods scheme. But do remember to make adjustments for partial exemption. What do you do when you discover you've made a mistake in a previous VAT return? Well, if it's less than £10,000, then you just make a correction in the current VAT return. If it's more than £10,000 but less than £50,000 and doesn't exceed 1% of your sales in box 6, then you can also make an adjustment in that VAT return. Anything larger, then you have to notify separately to HMRC. VAT is a complex tax, and I know I've used terms here which I haven't explained. So if we've raised any questions today, then please get in touch and we'll be happy to help. I'm Alan Long from the Long Partnership, making life less taxing.